better. Is that the right thing? Yeah, that's the right thing. Alrighty. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about the project. So let me actually start from the beginning of this, how you get to this class. So you're going to start from the beginning of the class. And then you're going to go over to your course content, scroll down to the bottom, and you have your two big projects for this class are the semester-long social media project, and then your Hootsuite certifications. So I told you all I'd give you all the directions, the information for those. And I realized now that I'm looking at it, I forgot to add the link. So I'll add the link here as well that you need to go to register for the Hootsuite direction or the Hootsuite certifications, okay? Now I did actually extend the deadline on this to Friday the 3rd because all of our other assignments are due on Fridays, so I wanted to be consistent. Okay. So I gave you until Friday, December 3rd, all right? All of our other assignments are also due at 11:59 at night, so this one is as well as the parts for the social media project are also going to be due on Fridays at 11:59. The only one that's not going to be due on a Friday is the final presentation and the final actual project. They're going to be due on the Tuesday of final exams week. Okay, so still 11:59 at night, but on the Tuesday, because that's when your final exam would have been if we were having a final exam for this class. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the details of this assignment. So on the front of it, you just have the basic information of what the parts are, but if you click into it, you're going to get your full directions. So let me make this a little bit bigger. Yes, they are. So if you scroll down for each individual assignment, you'll see the directions for that individual assignment. And then if you click on the individual assignment, you'll see the directions again and the due date. Okay. So these assignments, part 1 and part 2 are worth 20 points each. Part 3, which is the final, is worth, is the final in the presentation, that's worth 30 points. Okay. If you decide to work in groups, then I'm going to take a portion of the points out for the group evaluation. So the group evaluation for part 1 and part 2 is 5 points each, which actually represents about 25% of the overall grade. And then for the final project, it's worth 10 points, which is about 30% of the overall grade. Okay. Because I do believe in putting weight on the group work if you're working in a group. Okay. So what we have here is the first part of the assignment, which is due October 15th, which is the Friday of the Friday of midterm exam week. And so this part is 5 to 7 pages. You're going to have an introduction. The introduction is going to include a description of the company or the individual client that you're going to be creating your social media plan for. Then you're going to include analysis of the company or client business climate and their current social media efforts. So this is where you're just going to essentially say a couple of paragraphs is what kind of business do they do, right? So in the introduction, who are they? What kind of business do they do? What's their business climate like, right? So is everyone in their business already on particular social media platforms? Is no one in their business on social media platforms? You're also going to put in the analysis a why. So why should they be on social media and what would be the benefits? Then you're going to have a summary of the history of and their business objectives and their target audience. So this is where you're going to say like what has been their company history, or what is the history of their company? Have they been on social media in the past, and what kind of clients have they targeted? Then the next part of this is going to be number 4 is for you to perform a social media audit and report the results of the audit and recent efforts. So that'll probably be the largest part of this first project. You're going to support your information with research, and specifically library research. It doesn't necessarily have to be like academic journals or books. It might be like business trade press, right? Especially for something like this, you're going to be looking at a lot of trade press. So it might be things like the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. It might be things like Forbes or Variety, or any trade press that comes out for the industry that you're looking at. Okay. Also, government papers and white papers from think tanks and stuff like that might be the kinds of things that you would also include in this, depending on who the client is that you're building this for. Okay. But it does need to be researched, and it does need to be supported. And then you're going to have your summary of insights. So essentially your conclusion, right? You've done the research now, you've done an audit. So what kinds of proposed insights do you think you're going to be able to gain from essentially what would be part 2? So you're going to wrap up part 1 with what you think might happen as a result of the research. So a little bit of futures casting, essentially. You're going to include a title page, any references, charts, images, other data representations need to follow the APA style guide. All right. And that's it. 20 points. There you go. 5 to 7 pages. Not bad. Okay. You can use the chapter social, or from the chapters in your textbooks, there's a social plan. Some like questions that kind of guide this. And so for this brand summary and social media analysis, you would use parts 1 and 4 of that from your textbook if you're going to use those. And that will also provide some more support on like framing questions and research questions and things like that. That could be really helpful. Okay, part 2. Part 2 is due Friday, November 19th. So a little over a month after part 1. And in part 2, you're going to have also an introduction. This introduction is going to consist of parts of part 1's introduction. Okay, but it's going for this one, I want you to talk about the company's social and business environment in a little bit more detail than you probably would have in the first part. Okay. You also want to think about part 1 and part 2 are going to come together into your final project. So you can also use the introduction of part 2 as essentially a transition from part 1 to kind of preview what's going to happen in part 2 and then transition you out into the final. In this section, in the first part, we analyze the business. In the second part, we're analyzing the customer. So this is going to be an analysis of your customer research. You're going to base your research on other kinds of customer research so that you can present in this part your big idea. So what's the thing you want your client to do that's going to either attract them more customers or keep them the customers they already have? In this section, you're presenting that big idea and discussing your big idea in your social media story. You're going to use the social media story template that will allow your client to understand the social media landscape, where their story will fit and how it'll function. Again, you're supporting this with library research and resources. You're going to have a title page, a reference, and any charts, images, or other data still needs to be presented with APA in mind. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this may be a straight. Would we be able to do maybe a PowerPoint presentation as opposed to a?
No. The PowerPoint you can do as part of the final though. But this should be formatted, it's essay, it's paragraph format, but it should be formatted like a white paper. So white papers are formatted with a little bit bigger margins, usually on whatever the binding side is 1.5 inches, and the rest are 1 inch all the way around. Okay. You can have your kind of white paper style headings, which are a little bit bigger. Okay, you can have a little bit more color. Okay. And then they're usually set with the headers are usually set with more space between the sections than a traditional essay. So a traditional essay is double spaced, but a white paper might be, you would actually use 1.5 inches, or I'm sorry, 1.5 inch between the lines instead of double space. So it's a little bit tighter in the line spacing, but it's bigger in the margin and header spacing. So you might have like 14 or 18 point between the top and the bottom of a header. Okay. So you can use that formatting. But like I said, you can also use color, which you can't do in a regular essay. You can, you can embed your charts and images, which you can't do in an academic essay. This can be a lot more fun, I guess, is what I'm saying. I expect this to be pitched the way you would pitch it to a client, right? Which is why, again, you would use white paper formatting, which also has a lot more white space in it than a traditional essay. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the final. So your final presentation and project is due December 7th. By 11:59, it's worth 30 points. And the final, you're combining part 1 and part 2, and then the last part for part 3. This is going to come in between 15 and 25 pages, double spaced, depending on how long the previous sections were, right? So you have to have enough room to put in the previous sections and then enough room to do the final thing. So for this one, you're going to have an overall introduction. That's a comprehensive introduction for both the 2 previous parts and the final part. Transitions, transition sections or transition paragraphs, or maybe sentences, depending on how you have it laid out, between the introduction, parts 1 and part 2, and the final section. In the final section, this is your implementation of your social media plan. So you put your plan together, proposed a plan of how it would be structured in parts 1 and part 2, and now you're actually putting the plan together in the final project. So this is going to include your social media channels that you selected for your plan to disseminate your big idea, along with your content calendars. Now, this is another reason why you might end up at 25 pages. Your content calendar might be 3 months long. It's going to be 1 page per month, right? So that's already 3 pages of 25 pages. Okay. And then you're going to also include your social media editorial or production calendars. Now, this one, depending again on how many months you're looking at, some people will use 1 calendar for their production and editorial calendar and their content calendar. Some people use 2. I actually use 2, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But that would also be included in the page total for this project. And then you're going to have your social media metrics with your KPIs and your objectives for each channel. And then your budget, and your budget is going to include information budgeting for employees or contractors, equipment costs, production costs, graphics costs if you're having graphics design, and social media costs, and a breakdown of what you're budgeting and why. Okay, so it'll include an Excel spreadsheet with the budget, and then 1 page that explains what you're budgeting and why. And then again, library support for your ideas, title page, reference, images, charts, and so forth need to meet APA standard. All right. And I just realized that total is actually off. It should be 40 because it's supposed to account for, unless I did not. The points are all together. It looks like, yeah, the points are all together. Let me change that real quick so I don't forget. All right, because it's essentially, it's 40 points altogether because it includes the presentation points. The presentation's worth 10 points. All right, so if you work in a group, then you're gonna have 10 points. On the final, you're gonna have 10 points for the presentation, 10 points for the group evaluation, 20 points for the final. If you work as an individual, it's gonna be 10 points for the presentation, 30 points for the final project. Okay. And then, so 40 points altogether. Alrighty. Alrighty. Questions, comments, thoughts, feelings, concerns of any kind? Everybody feel like they have a clear understanding of what they're expected to do? Fair. Fair. We'll have time to talk about it again throughout the semester. And as we put things together, that's fair. Okay. Remember that for this project, again, it's semester long. Each part builds on the next part. Okay. So it sounds like a lot at the end, but it's not really, because you already wrote half of it. Depending actually on how you write it, you might have actually written the whole thing by the end of November. So it's totally up to you how this gets set up. Okay. Couple of things I would suggest that you start thinking about now as you're trying to figure out what the first part is that's going to be due on October 15th, which is about 3 weeks from now, is think about whether or not you're going to use a real company, real client. So, or a real client that you have access to, or are you going to use someone that you don't have access to? So when I say real, I mean somebody that you have access to versus a company that you don't have access to, okay? If you're doing a company that you don't have access to, whether you're working on your own or in a group, a lot of this is gonna be proposals. So you're gonna have to write everything's gonna have to be written as a true pitch to a company. But then you wanna position yourself as someone who's trying to get them as a client, okay? If you're writing this as someone who has access to all of the information because you're using yourself or a group mate as your client here, then you can actually do all of this work as, working for someone, okay? If you're doing it for yourself, right? Managing your own business or your own, this is something that you want to be able to do as part of your business, you can also include in here using yourself as that business, right? So this could be set up as something that would actually then be something you would take to a bank or another crediting institution that you're gonna request funding from in order to pay for these things, right? So think about who your person or client is, and then also who or what your objectives are as the person who's doing the work. Okay, so how are you going to use this work later? Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, cool deal. Any questions? No? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about analytics and what we're going to need in order to get started on our analytics work next week. So I said during our last class meeting that you are going to need access, you're going to need to bring your laptops with you, so that's still a thing. I did sadly find out that one of my favorite open source research options for being able to collect data is now dying. I'm heartbroken. So one of the sources that I use to be able to do social media analytics is, and one specifically in searching for like hashtags and topics that are trending on social media, is actually to use this one, which is called Workbench. But sadly, Workbench is dying on October 10th. Oh, so sad. So what we're going to use instead is actually another one that I really do enjoy using. And it is actually going to be tags. Which, where did my, did I close my thingy box? And I'll put a link to this in your class space on Blackboard. So we're going to use tags, which is a Google, it uses a Google sheet. So you will need to have, if you don't have already, a Google email address and a public Twitter account in order to collect the hashtags from Twitter using this tool. I will have some hashtags that I'll make available to you. And then I will also, if you don't have a public Twitter account, or you have a Twitter account, but you don't want to make it public, you will just let me know which hashtags to collect on your behalf. So I'll collect them and then I'll send you the information. Okay. So you'll need to have those things. You'll also need to have just access to your other social media or your other data collection tools. So one of your other tools that you're going to need is just access either to Google Sheets or to an Excel spreadsheet, and then obviously a Word document. All right. So, yes, ma'am. No, go ahead. Oh, sure. Sure. So tags uses Twitter's API, which we talked about earlier in the semester, to collect information out of Twitter. So tags collects only public tweets that are publicly available. But when it scrapes Twitter for those tweets, however frequent you want your page set up for. So we'll take a look at this one that I had open from a class from last night. So in here, I've been collecting this hashtag mute R. Kelly for over a year. So this one is set to auto collect every hour of every day. So it has collected 154,000 over that many tweets. Of that, 114,000 of them are unique. It's been collecting since January 2019, and it collected its last tweet 2025, so roughly an hour ago. Okay. Now this sheet does collect on Greenwich Mean Time. So remember we talked about where Greenwich Mean Time is. So for this sheet, you would actually have to go in and recalculate the date and time in order to be able to find out where this is in relationship to your own time zone, right? Now, sometimes that won't matter, but most times, especially when we're talking about a business, it does, right? They want to know when people are active in comparison to their time zone, right? So this is one that tags collects the ID string. So every tweet on Twitter has a unique ID string. The username, the tweet itself, the time it was created, the geo coordinates. Now I know this looks blank, but it actually isn't. There is data hidden in there, which using a Google Fusion table and Google Maps, you can export. If the person has their geo tags on in their Twitter app and on their phone, this geo tag is accurate up to 500 feet. If they have their geo tags on their phone, but not on Twitter, it's accurate to about 5 blocks. I'm just gonna let that sink in. Kind of scary. Yeah, I'm not a fan personally. I don't use geotags on my social media. Particularly because if you're tagging from, now if you're tagging from like inside a building on campus, okay, right? If you're tagging from your apartment, yeah, we wouldn't, I wouldn't, that's bad looks.
I usually do it after I've left the location.
Okay, so that does not matter.
It doesn't?
No, what this data picks up is where your phone was when you made the tag. So if you're in your apartment, that's what it's gonna tag.
Oh, no. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, so if you use geotags, what I would suggest is if you're gonna tag a location, be in that location when you tag it. Right, so if you're gonna tag like, you know, the Houston airport, and but what you wanna say is leaving, even though in truth you're coming back, do all your tags from the airport. Right, don't leave the airport. Right, that's one that's actually people have been confused about, right? Because so the geotag, when you tag it on social media though, what they'll see is whatever you tag, right? So if you tagged it to the airport, but you're sitting in your apartment, then social media, the public face is gonna say, oh, you're in Hawaii, right? But a data sheet like this picks up where the phone was.
So with the tag situation, so basically, we're using this project, right?
For the geotags?
Well, no, not the geotag, like the actual tags.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so basically, what we're for is we choose a brand, we want to, and they have like a campaign, let's say, hashtag, let's do it.
Right.
So we would go, and this would take all the tweets and stuff like that, that's been tagged, hashtag.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you might be looking at, now this tag doesn't go into the past. It doesn't go back more than 7 days. You can set it to go back 7 days, but it doesn't go back more than that.
Oh.
Right? So if you have something that's a current campaign, for example, that you want to be able to get, then you should start getting it now so that you'll have stuff going into the future. But if you don't need it to really necessarily do the past that far back, you can, wait and start it, in a week or two, and then start collecting and continue collecting. Depending on how active the hashtag is what you should use as a guide for how long or how often you want to collect, right? So when I started this collection, the Mute R. Kelly hashtag was extremely active. And so I wanted it to only collect once an hour. So it goes out and it scrapes all the tweets that are out there in that hour. And then it goes out again and it scrapes everything that's there for the next hour, right? And a tag scrapes a representative sample of what's out there. So if there's 100,000 tweets out there in a given hour, then it scrapes like 10% of what's there. Okay. Now, if you have it collecting every minute, then it's actually going to get every tweet every minute that was out there, right? So how often you want it to collect is totally up to you, and it'll keep collecting until the spreadsheet fills up. Okay. Then you have your user ID. Which is, everybody has a unique ID on Twitter. And then your source, then your profile image, a count on the number of followers the user has, a count on the number of user friends, the user location. So this is user provided. So whatever you said in your Twitter bio as a location, this is what's being pulled. So for example, if I was in this collection, my user location is marked as always enjoying the bounty. So that's what it would say here. Right. The status URL, and then the entry string for the hashtag. Okay. So the status URL is actually the URL for the tweet that you collected. Okay. So this is the tweet, and this is what it looks like. As long as the person doesn't delete the tweet off of Twitter, this URL that the tag sheet collects will be active for the rest of eternity. Okay. Alrighty. So that's tags. Tags is it's actually an excellent way to be able to collect and set up auto collections for things, especially, right? So if you have a hashtag related to your industry that you're doing, that's not specific to a person or specific to an institution, but a sort of industry driven, it's a great way to be able to collect those hashtags as well, so that you can have some comparative data to comparing the business to the industry, for example, right? Okay. So, and I'll add the link for tags in there so that you can start collecting tags that are useful. We are also going to use, in order to do some visualizations and analysis, which I seem to have closed that one too. What was I doing earlier? We're going to use a tool called Voyant Tools. Voyant Tools allows us to be able to do analysis on large pieces of text and data, to be able to do rhetorical analysis and content analysis, particularly looking at frequency of text types and text usages. And it seems like it wants to be very slow today. Let me see if I get off the student network, if I improve my life. Maybe. There we go. All right, so I'm going to show you one using the corpus that they already have. So they have Shakespeare, and there's all of Shakespeare's plays, for example, so you can see. So one of the things that we will look at is frequency of words that are being used, right? We'll look at comparing document lengths. We also may take a look at word relationships of text, right? Words across text and the frequency that they occur, okay? So that kind of analysis can be really helpful, actually, especially if you do a hashtag collection for an industry, so that you can help your client identify the kinds of words that people are using to talk about products in that industry, for example, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So this is one of the tools that we'll use as well. Both tags and Voyant tools are open source tools, so there's no cost associated with them, all right? The last tool that we will use is our Hootsuite. So for Hootsuite, we're going to use, you'll be able to connect your personal social media accounts to it in order to be able to do particular kinds of analyses over those specific accounts. You'll also be able to do some comparative analysis over other accounts that you have access to. Oops. So one of the things that we'll look at, oops, looks like I need to reconnect, which I will do later. Let me do this. I will log out. So one of the things that we'll use in Hootsuite is the analytics tool to be able to analyze our different accounts. So this is the account that I run for one of the grants here at Texas Southern. So we can see that Hootsuite gives us a number of analytical data points, and we can compare those across different platforms, right? So we can compare, for example, our post on Facebook to our posts on Twitter, to our post on Instagram, to our post on LinkedIn, for example. in order to be able to determine how active things are and what's happening here. Okay. So these will be our tools that we'll use in order to do the analytics part of this class. Okay. All right. Last thing. Now, for those of you who are looking at doing one of the other ways that we're going to do analysis to be able to learn how to do it is we'll also just use our own Twitter accounts, okay? Because, oops, not what I meant. Using our own accounts often is one of the best ways to be able to learn what the data looks like and what we can do with it, right? Because then we can get familiar, so we'll know what we're doing when somebody asks, right? So we'll take a look at our 28-day summaries and we'll do some comparative analysis between our current 28 days, our previous 28 days. We'll also look at our top tweets, top mentions, impressions, followers, and this sort of thing. I'll show y'all how, starting next week, we'll go through how do you actually do the downloading of the data out of Twitter, clean it in your Excel spreadsheet, and then start analyzing your numbers and be able to do the calculations so you know how to create the numbers and how to present them to a client. Okay? All right. Feel like you learned a lot today? Maybe too much? You guys look a little bit tired, a little bit overwhelmed. Yeah. It is. It is. Yeah. I think so. I'm proud of you guys. You made it this far. You can do it. Need some reflection time. You don't, well, and I'm really glad you said that. Yeah. Well, okay, so so I'm going to tell you, I told you guys this at the beginning of the semester, right? There are levels to this, right? You can be just a social media content person. You can. You can be the person who all they do is the content. All you do is create the content, right? But I will also tell you that's the lowest paid person on the phone and the easiest person to replace, right? That person usually does not have to have a bachelor's degree, right? That person is the person who always has to hustle, always. But you're also the person who's being told what to do. You're not making any decisions, right? But a great person, they're lovely, right? They actually make really good money, right? They start between 40 and 60K. Not a bad living, right? It's very respectable, right? You can have a good time in Houston on that kind of money as an employee, right? Very nice, happy life, right? But the next person above that person is the content manager. Content managers have to have bachelor's degrees, typically. They're typically going to make between $60,000 and $150,000 a year, but they're the boss, right? They're the person who's telling the content creator what to do, where to be, when to get there, what to shoot. They're the ones making the editorial calendar. They're the ones making the content plan. They're the ones making the decision about the brand. They're the ones who are paying attention to the numbers. Above that person is their boss. Their boss is the person who is the analytics and social media marketing manager. That person is the one who understands the spreadsheets and the numbers, right? That's the person who understands what an impression number equals in terms of impressions to dollars. Those people make anywhere from $60,000 to $200,000 a year. That's when you get into stock options and travel plans and all of that fun stuff. Those folks tend to have bachelor's degrees, but they also can have master's degrees as well often. And they're the person who's making the those are your C-suites, right? Those are your executive or your E-suites, I'm sorry, your executive level people who are making executive level decisions. Right? They're the ones who are determining whether or not you should get involved in that $500,000 contract between one entity and another entity, right? They're the ones who are deciding, do we pay an influencer $1,000 a tweet or do we pay him $10 million for a campaign? So there's levels, right? And you pick, and you choose, and you decide, right? But my goal here is to make sure, because I think that even somebody who's doing the content creation, if you're doing the content creation, but you understand what content creation means to the numbers, you can also make sure that you end up on the top of the pay scale and not the bottom, right? You can also be someone who could come in the meeting and say, hey, I know you told me to do this, but if we stylize it like that, then we can drive more numbers and we can drive more followers and drive more eyes. We can get a higher impression rate, right? But if you don't understand how the numbers work, you can't go into the meeting and say that. All you can do is say, okay, I got my content plan for the week, so let me just create this content. And that's it, because you don't understand how business works and how it fits in. So that's what this is. That's what this class is. That's what the overall project for this semester is, right? But you can also, at the end, you might get to the end and be like, I learned a lot. That's really exciting. I'm still gonna do the content. Because I'll also say more dollars, more responsibility. So there is that. All right. All right. Feel good? That's a relative question, I suppose. Feel like you learned a lot?
I learned things like that.
I feel like you're gonna go and delete them all now.
You did, like, that sounds like, you know, I'm trying to figure it out.
I don't know that you could delete geotags from content you've already posted.
Oh, well, yeah, no, it's usually like stories and stuff, so those go away. But I'm
Yeah.
just saying, it's crazy how people can track, like, where you are and all that kind of stuff. That's really free.
It is, especially because in the US, unlike in the EU, the US doesn't have any privacy protections against that, right? And so there's a lot of data out there about people, and a lot of it, I mean, students are always surprised when I do this. And when we go through tags, one of the things I'm actually going to show you is how to extract that geolocation data out of that, right? And it is scary. I'm also going to say that is scary, right? Because tags especially is using Google spreadsheets, Google has more satellites up above Earth mapping the world than any other single business entity, right? That's why Twitter in tags, sorry, is also so accurate, because Twitter is timestamped. So is Google Maps. So if the data is coming into Google Sheets, and then you're using Google Fusion to create the Google map, it's all connecting straight through. And the geotag is based on latitude and longitude, which is very accurate, and then time-stamped. So Google Maps is going to give you a picture of where that was, right? Which is, again, why I wouldn't do this standing outside looking up at the sky. Because then there's a picture of you standing outside looking up at the sky. All right. So something to keep in mind. Well, now that I've frightened you for the afternoon, we're gonna let you guys go get something to eat. Go enjoy the rest of your homecoming. If you stand around outside, you know, look in front of you, keep in mind if you look up, you know. Hey, man, global surveillance, the way that it works. Right? Now, the good news is the darker tone your skin is, the less likely the computer is to still be able to recognize you because software is racist. Software is racist. What can I say, man? I teach rhetoric for a living. It's important. I like my students to be informed. I want you guys to know so that you go out into the world and you're like, well, these are the choices I made, right? Based on this information. Yeah, with public account. The crazy thing is, if you read your terms and conditions on all social media, they tell you that your data will be collected and it will be stored.
But they have it in this long little contract.
But not even that, I've actually read it, but I'm like, what does that entail? Like, you can read that.
Yeah, you can read it and it's
Doesn't sound
not always
bad.
clear. Right, it doesn't sound bad. It's like, oh, well, that's a trade-off. That's okay, right? And it is until you start to think about how long you've been on social media, right? And what that means has been captured, right? So for like someone like me who's had an email address since I was 14, right? I've been on social media and trackable for almost 30 years. Yeah, because I'm 45. Right? So I'm also the first generation of the first tracked generation, right? That's a technologically tracked generation, completely. Like, you know, everyone else has to find their ancestors and like, what do you call them? Census data, where you can only see your ancestor pop up once every 10 years. Well, with the advent of social media, that's not what's going to happen anymore, right? 100 years from now, people are going to be able to go to your social media and track you as their ancestor that way. And then they'll know, wow, look at what they did on Thursday, September 30th, when they were an undergrad at Texas Southern. That's so cool. Day in the life. Great grandma, great grandpa. Right? But that's what they'll be able to know. Instead of, you know, if you maybe turned in your census documents from Texas Southern last year, or as you turn them and track to your parents' house or your own apartment, right? So social media provides a lot of fun and interesting information too for the future or right now. All right. If you're interested, since I said the algorithms are racist, there is a book called Algorithms of the Oppressed by Sophia Noble that you may want to check out. It's actually a really good read and actually talks about Google and its continuous and ongoing problems. And you can actually get that and a bunch of other books that I suggest from my Zotero library, which I think I actually already linked to this class, but I will double check and make sure. So you can get links to the things that I've written, but then I also have in my library, which if you want to kind of find things for this project and not have to look so hard, it's a start. I already have there's like 250,000 items in my library already. This actually represents my entire research life, right? Since I was an undergrad. That's this. All right, but there is one called, where is it? Black Twitter. There's one for Afrofuturism. There's one for African American rhetoric. I do not think I have one specific. Yes, I do have one specifically for this class. So specifically for social media campaigns. something to get you started. Okay? All right. Have a great day, friends. I'll see you next week. You too. Enjoy your homecoming. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Good luck, Jack.
Thank you.